Bara town. Like life, it's not all roses. Sometimes there's loss. This is Foundation, and I am Lord Bara. In this episode, I'm going to tell you a story about a simple miner who fell in love. I hope you stick around for that, but before I do, let's build. So what's going on here is I'm marking out a new area for a mining settlement. I don't want it to be a large settlement, so I'm just creating the boundary of where I think the town should be. I call it a town, it's more like a satellite district, because the only thing that's going to happen here is people are going to live here and they're going to mine. They're going to mine these 2 iron deposits and 1 marble deposit that you can see over there on the right. I'm using the red brush to just highlight for myself where the perimeter is, and then I'm using the blue brush because that's kind of the road that I imagine will be the main road through. Now, even though it's a mining settlement, I'm still going to have to build all of the minimum facilities that villagers need. So they're going to need food, they're going to need water, they're going to need some church, because although these things are all available in the main town, it's pretty far away. It's right on the other side of this huge rock. Let's put a little church down here, just a few pieces that can seat probably about 50 villagers. Should be enough. Don't forget that you're also going to need a tax collector, because a tax collector doesn't want to travel all the way from the main town around here. In fact, he won't do that. So you're going to also need a tax collector in the local area, because Lord needs his taxes. You probably noticed as well that there's a cluster of berries slap bang in the middle of the road that I've drawn. I don't really have a good solution for that, if I'm honest, because I like the shape of the road. I don't like where the berries are. It'd be nice if I could remove the berries. I could do that with a mod, but right now I'm just sticking to the vanilla. So I'm going to have to deal with that, come up with a creative solution for that, and I'll see how it goes. You can let me know whether or not I'm successful or not. We'll see. Okay, let's just draw out what the town square to look like from here. I want that blue road to sweep through the middle of it, straight through the middle of those berries, which I'll figure out later, and the well usually somewhere in the middle. I'm not satisfied with where the manor house is right now. It's okay, but I'm not sure I'm feeling it. When I'm placing a market, what I'm doing is I'm thinking about what type of villager is going to live here. So it's predominantly going to be serfs, but if I place down a common goods stall as well and sell some clothes there, it opens me up to the ability to add in some commoners a little bit later down the line, like adding in a weaver and a tailor, for example. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint down 2 kidney-shaped residential areas either side of the road and let that auto-populate. So I'll start removing the planning lines that I put down initially in blue and red. They're obviously not part of the function of the town, they're just there as a guide to help me visualize what I want the shape to look like. After a lot more finessing than I care to show you, I eventually do settle on a shape that I'm going to go ahead with, and then I move on to just laying out the mines. So I'm going to end up having a little space here where all of the cranes go, all go together, and then that will quite nicely be opposite a little gap in the mines there where I can just stick a warehouse. I'll develop that later as a little goods area. And with that, I'm happy with the overall design. I think that's going to work out quite well. Just start hitting build on things, and this ends up taking quite a long time because I have to move a lot of resources initially around to this area to get this all start being built. So here we go. While that's happening, let me introduce you to Mila, the youngest and roundest of the Miller daughters. She never fancied herself the marrying type. Among her 7 sisters, she was the quiet one, the sturdy one, known more for her steady hands at the mill than for any girlish charms. She had long resigned herself to the rhythm of flour sacks and millstones, watching as each of her 7 sisters was swept away by tradesmen, farmers, and even a travelling bard once. Love, it seemed, was meant for others. But the heart is a curious thing, prone to its own wanderings, and one bright autumn day it led Mila to the door of O'Daniel, a miner in Bara town. She had no particular plan in mind when she hefted a sack of flour onto her wide hip and made her way through the village, her open-toed sandals carrying her to a place she never even knew existed. O'Daniel was a man carved from the stone he worked with, his face perpetually shadowed with the grimness of one who spent too long in the dark. His eyes, sharp and narrow, bore the weight of the earth's depths. His brow, furrowed from years of mining, rarely lifted, and his words were as sparse as the sunlight he so seldom saw. If ever a man seemed unlikely to blush, it was O'Daniel. Yet, as Mila knocked and the door creaked open, revealing him standing there, something strange happened. There she stood, her round face flushed with the exertion of carrying the flour, a few specks dusting her apron and cheeks. She looked up at him with eyes wide and warm, expectant, yet uncertain. The sight of her mousy, pinned-back hair, her dusty apron, with the faintest trace of a smile, struck him like a miner's hammer to flint. His breath caught. The dull, sullen hue of his face flushed with an astonishing red, the colour climbing up his neck to settle across his cheeks like a sudden bloom of wild berries. He stammered, fumbling for words that didn't come. Mila, for her part, blinked in surprise at his reaction, so shifted the sack on her hip and with a small grin said, "Pa told me to bring this by. Says you paid at the baker." There was a beat of silence. O'Daniel's mouth worked soundlessly before he managed a hoarse, "Thank you." And so it was, in the simple exchange of flour and glances, that something shifted in the air between them. Neither fully understood it, but as O'Daniel's heart pounded beneath his work-worn chest and Mila's smile softened at the edges, the unlikely seed of affection was planted. In the early days, their courtship was anything but smooth. Daniel, who had spent more time with pickaxes and coal dust than with kind words or gentle maids, found himself unsure of how to speak when Mila was near. He wasn't a man who often dealt with feelings, much less that made his heart race like he did when her soft voice reached his ears. Mila, for her part, was just as unpracticed. Having spent most of her life in the company of her sisters, she hadn't the faintest idea how to navigate the unfamiliar waters of romance. She'd watched her sisters marry, one after the other, but her own path had always felt more suited to milling and hauling flour than to stolen kisses and whispered words, and yet something about O'Daniel called to her. Early meetings were awkward, full of fidgeting hands and clumsy silences. At the village well, where Mila often went to fetch water, Daniel would linger, pretending to be busy with some task or other, his eyes always drifting her way. They'd exchange a few shy words, comments about the weather or the latest news from the fields, but mostly they would stand together with an air of nervous energy. This wasn't the kind of love that you read about in country romances. No fiery passion or grand gestures. It was something more real, more innocent, perhaps. Their connection grew not in fireworks, but in long moments of simply being together. They'd steal away from the noise of the village, taking walks by the riverbank where the only sound was the rustling of leaves and the steady flow of water. One day, Daniel had spent the better part of the afternoon in the forest, gathering wild flowers, with hands more used to hauling stone than handling delicate stems. He carefully arranged the blooms with soil in an old pot, hoping they'd convey what he couldn't say. He knew he wasn't good with words, but flowers, well, they spoke in their own way, didn't they? It was his first true gesture, a bold step for a man who'd never been bold in matters of the heart, and so with the bouquet clutched tightly, he made his way to the mill as the sun began its slow descent. The mill was alive with its usual hum, the rhythmic turning of the wheel, the dust of flour thick in the air. He hesitated at the door, suddenly feeling out of place, but gathered his courage and stepped inside. Mila was there, mending a sack at a large wooden table. Nearby, her father busied himself with a rickety old ladder leading to the hayloft. He glanced up from his work as O'Daniel approached, but it was Mila's mother who intercepted him first, her gaze falling on the bouquet before assessing O'Daniel's dirt-streaked clothes. "What's this?" she asked. Her voice was tight as she stepped between him and Mila. Daniel's heart swelled with a mixture of pride and nerves. "For Mila," he managed, holding out the flowers. His voice was rough and polished, but there was tenderness in the gesture. But Mila's mother did not soften. Her lips pursed and she looked him up and down, her disapproval clear. "Flowers?" Her tone filled with disdain. "You think you can come waltzing in here like some courtly lord? It's not proper to woo a lady in such a way." "But Mila..." O'Daniel's heart sank. "No miller will ever court a dirty miner." She crossed her arms, her voice cold. "We need a man with a proper trade, not one who comes home coated in soot. Now be off with you." A foolish thing, wilting in his grip. He swallowed hard. Mila silent, the mother's harsh words ringing in his ears. He felt more alone than he ever had. With nothing left to say, he placed the flowers on the table beside her and left. He didn't look back. Days passed. Daniel would catch sight of Mila at the village well, or at the prancing boar, but Mila barely acknowledged him. Each time he'd sink deeper into frustration as he watched her disappear through the door or round a corner. His friends didn't tease him anymore. They knew better than to poke fun at a wounded heart. All seemed lost. Daniel had thought, foolishly perhaps, that there was something between them. But now, with each passing day, that hope faded, replaced by the bitter taste of disappointment. Mila's indifference felt like a wall he could not break through, and the weight of her mother's harsh words still lingered in his heart. No miller would ever court a miner, it seemed. And O'Daniel, for all his strength in the mines, had never felt so powerless. Time moved on, and he grew distant from the world, retreating deeper into himself after their fallout. Mila, fearful for him and burdened by the pain her mother had caused, found herself once again at his door. The knock startled him. "Who is it?" he called. "It's Mila," came the quiet reply. Bitterness surged in him. "If you come to mock me, leave," he growled. He didn't expect her to open the door, but she did. Mila stepped in, her expression soft, no malice in her eyes. "I didn't come to mock you, Daniel. I stayed away out of shame, because of my mother's words, but my feelings never changed. My love for you still grows, like the flowers you brought me." Daniel blinked. "The flowers?" he whispered. Mila nodded. "Yes, they're still growing." She sat down beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "I don't care what my mother thinks. I care about you." Without another word, and with a passion that had stretched between them like the skin of a drum, they embraced for the first time, as lovers do. The tension in the Miller household was palpable as Mila and O'Daniel stepped inside. The mill was quiet, save for the creak of wood as Mila's father paused mid-motion, another rung of old ladder in his hands, while her mother frowned, arms crossed. "What's this?" her mother asked, her sharp gaze flicking between them. Mila squeezed O'Daniel's hand. "Father, Mother, I love O'Daniel, and I want to marry him. Nothing will change that." Her mother bristled, but her father raised a hand. "Let her speak." "I've made up my mind," Mila continued, her voice steady. "He's good to me, and my heart is set." Her mother's face darkened, but before she could protest, her father stepped forward with a sigh. "Well, I'm not surprised. 8 daughters, 1 left. I'll be a fool to stop you from finding a good man, miner or no miner." He turned to O'Daniel, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. "You seem like a decent enough sort. If that changes, you'll answer to me." O'Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." Her father gave a satisfied nod and turned to his wife, who remained silent but resigned. "You have my blessing," she said gruffly. And just like that, they were engaged. 3 months had passed since Mila and O'Daniel's engagement, and on their wedding day, the sun shone warmly over Bara town. A perfect day with a soft breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Bright bunting fluttered in the wind, and an archway of willow stood ready for the couples to exchange vows. O'Daniel waited nervously beneath the arch, glancing at the villagers seated on the hay bales. Everything was set for a joyful celebration. By the windmill, Mila's sisters laughed as they adorned her hair with ribbons and blooms. Just as they finished, a gust of wind caught the blue ribbons, lifting them towards the grain loft. "I'll get it," Mila said, dashing towards the ladder despite her sister's alarmed protests. She climbed to the old ladder, which had been patched and propped more times than it was safe to do so, each rung creaking under her weight, sunlight glinting off her dress as she ascended, blissfully unaware of the cruel twist fate had in store. At the altar, Daniel adjusted his collar, anticipation bubbling in his chest. But soon the villagers began rising from their seats, murmuring in concern. Snatches of conversation reached him. "Is she all right? What happened?" Confusion stirred within him as the guests gathered closer. Whispering anxiously, the joyful buzz had thinned into a solemn silence, and O'Daniel's heart raced, though he didn't yet understand why. As the crowd shifted their focus towards the mill, O'Daniel stood alone beneath the arch of willow. The warmth of the sun seemed distant, and the once cheerful atmosphere grew unnervingly still. And in that moment, though he couldn't yet know why, Daniel felt utterly alone. I'm sorry about that, but when you're lord of a town, you hear lots of stories. I'm just glad I have someone to share them with. So if you have been, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. This has been Foundation, and I've been Lord Bara.